cannot reveal my exact location for obvious reasons. The last transmission almost cost me my life. When I turned off the camera in that basement, they were already entering the building. I managed to escape through the back, but his dogs caught up with me. One of them bit my left leg hard enough to leave a deep wound that is still healing. It would have been the end of my journey if it weren't for a family driving by. They saw me bleeding, running desperately down the deserted street. Without asking questions, they put me in the vehicle and drove for hours until we reached this place. Good people still exist in this world, even when the institutions that are supposed to protect them fail terribly. For those of you following me for the first time, my name is Thomas Berry. I was a Catholic priest for over 20 years, serving faithfully in 3 different dioceses. During this time, I discovered something disturbing, an institutionalized system of abuse and cover-up that operates at the highest levels of the Church. A system so powerful and so protected that few can escape it with their lives and reputations intact. A system that protects predators and silences victims with frightening efficiency. Since I began exposing these forbidden truths, I have lived like a fugitive, constantly moving between temporary shelters, always one step ahead of those who would permanently silence my voice. I have received death threats, attempts to discredit my testimony, and even nighttime visits from mysterious men who never identify themselves. Today, from a simple room with wooden walls and a view of mountains whose name I cannot reveal, I want to finally tell you about Boston. About the case that exposed the entire system I described earlier. It's not just my personal story. It's documented proof that everything I've revealed in previous videos is just the tip of the iceberg of a decades-long conspiracy of silence. What happened in Boston was not an isolated incident. It wasn't an error of judgment, as they tried to make us believe. It was the systematic revelation of a power structure that prioritized its reputation above the protection of the most vulnerable. And what you hear now could forever change your perception of how powerful institutions operate in the shadows. If this is your first time watching one of my testimonies, get ready. The truth I'm about to share is difficult to hear, but it's even more dangerous to tell. If you value truth over comfort, keep watching. Leave the word testimony in the comments so I know that you are with me on this dangerous journey in search of the truth. In 2001, I received a call from an old seminary classmate who worked in Boston. His voice shook in a way I will never forget. "Thomas, something's going on here. The Boston Globe is investigating an abuse case. It started with a priest, but they're digging deeper, much deeper." The urgency in his tone instantly alerted me that this wasn't just another isolated scandal that would be quickly hushed up with discreet financial deals and transfers. At the time, I was still an active priest, celebrating daily masses, hearing confessions, blessing the faithful who fully trusted me and the institution I represented. But internally, I was already struggling with my own disturbing discoveries about the church system. This telephone conversation was like distant thunder announcing the devastating storm that was to come. I vividly remember hanging up the phone and sitting in my parish office, transfixed by the revelation. Through the window, I watched the church garden where innocent children played after Sunday school, their laughter reaching my ears while an intense chill ran down my spine. That sight, the purity of those children contrasting with the horror of the information I had just received, was the moment I knew I could no longer be an accomplice through silence. My leg hurt sharply as I moved to reach my aging notes from that time. I've been keeping these records for years, hidden in secret locations, moving them constantly. The scar from the guard dog's bite will be a permanent reminder of the price I pay for the truth. From the windows of this temporary mountain refuge, I can see only the vastness of a dense forest, the kind of isolation that is now my only protection. I'm far from any big city, no easy access, no reliable cell phone signal. And it's better that way. In those early days in Boston, What began as a journalistic investigation focused on a single priest, John Geoghegan, quickly turned into something much bigger, something none of us were prepared to discover. Journalists on the Boston Globe's Spotlight team, initially investigating allegations against this single priest, began to notice a disturbing pattern in the documents they were unearthing. It wasn't just an isolated case. It wasn't just a bad apple, as bishops often described abusive priests. The colleague who, he called me, had access to privileged information within the Archdiocese. They found documents, Thomas. Transfer letters, psychological evaluations, secret agreements with families. The Cardinal knew everything. His voice broke at that moment. Everything. He also told me about a lawyer, Mitchell Garabedian, who had spent years representing victims of clergy abuse, meticulously collecting evidence of an institutional pattern of cover-up. As the investigation progressed, I began to receive more connections, not just from my colleague in Boston, but from other priests in different dioceses. Everyone expressed the same fear. If they find Boston, they'll come after us next. It wasn't fear for the victims or the truth that would be revealed. It was fear for the institution's reputation, the financial consequences, the public scandal. No mention of the devastated children whose lives had been irrevocably changed. One night, as I was preparing my homily for Sunday, I received a brown folder in the mail. No return address, just my name, typed on a white label. Inside were photocopies of internal memos from the Archdiocese of Boston, detailing how Father Geoghegan had been transferred between 6 different parishes in 17 years, despite repeated accusations of sexual abuse against children. One of the memos, signed by Cardinal Law himself, referred to Geoghegan as a good pastor who deserved a new chance in a different parish, where, unsurprisingly, he continued to abuse vulnerable children. What the Boston Globe Spotlight team discovered forever transformed public perception of the Church. When the first report was published in January 2002, the impact was immediate and devastating. He wasn't a priest. There were not 5 or 10 as many imagined. There were almost 90 priests in the Boston area alone involved in cases of sexual abuse against minors. 90 ordained men, 90 who swore to serve God and protect their flock. Almost 90 predators using clerical collars as a cover for unthinkable acts against the most innocent. Almost 90. Let that sink in for a moment. One city, 90 priests. Think of the hundreds, possibly thousands of children affected, lives destroyed before they even fully began. And the worst thing, the absolutely most disgusting thing, is that the hierarchy knew. This was not a problem hidden from the watchful eyes of leadership. Internal documents would later prove that Cardinal Bernard Law, one of the most powerful figures in the American Church, a man directly trusted by the Vatican, had detailed knowledge of the abuses and continued to move priests from parish to parish like pieces on a perverse chessboard. I need to pause for a moment. My leg is throbbing again. That guard dog's bite was deeper than I initially imagined. I need to take my antibiotics now. The infection in my leg is gradually getting better, but the doctors have warned me that I'm not out of the woods yet. An apt analogy, isn't it? Just like the truth about these abuses. It gets better slowly, with moments of progress followed by painful setbacks, but we still face the risk of deep institutional infections that can spread throughout the body if not treated properly. When I read the first Spotlight reports that freezing January morning, sitting alone in the sacristy before morning mass, I immediately recognized the same dark pattern that I had witnessed in my own experiences within the Church, the same meticulously structured system, the same calculated tactics of transfers and cover-ups, the same obsessive concern with institutional reputation cruelly placed above the safety and well-being of children. But the scale, the sheer magnitude of what was happening in Boston was shocking even to someone like me, who had seen the internal files in other dioceses. The list of names published by the Boston Globe made me physically ill. I recognized some of them, priests with whom I had studied at the seminary, men I met on spiritual retreats. One of them had celebrated with me at a special mass just 2 years earlier, smiles on their faces, warm handshakes, deep theological discussions, all while carrying secrets so dark they defy comprehension. The stories that began to emerge were horrifying in their details. Children abused in sacristies, during religious camps, on parish trips, even in their own homes during pastoral visits. The pattern was systematic. Predators often chose children from vulnerable families, those with absent fathers, financial problems, or extremely devout families who viewed priests as unquestioned representatives of God on earth. The abuse of trust was as profound as the physical abuse. What disturbed me most about Spotlight's series of reports was the meticulous documentation of how the Archdiocese of Boston had managed these cases. Internal memos referred to the abuses as problems, regrettable incidents, or lapses in judgment, never like crimes, never like serious sins, and certainly never as the atrocities they truly were. The language used in the documents was clinical, bureaucratic, deliberately distanced from the horror it described. One document in particular, which was reproduced in full by the newspaper, revealed how Cardinal Law had been informed that Father John Geoghegan had molested 7 boys in the same family. 7 children, a single, devastated family. The Cardinal's response? A letter to the priest, thanking him for his zealous service and informing him of his transfer to a new parish, without any mention of the accusations, without alerting the new community, without restrictions on his work with children. The result was predictable and devastating. More abuse, more victims, more lives destroyed. The turning point of the Boston investigation, the moment that truly broke the wall of silence that had protected the system for decades, was when the Boston Globe gained, through an arduous legal battle, access to the Archdiocese's confidential files. This victory did not come easily. The Archdiocese fought fiercely to keep these documents sealed, turning to every legal avenue possible, hiring the most powerful law firms and lobbying influential politicians to prevent these papers from coming to light. But the Spotlight team's determination prevailed, and what they discovered inside those confidential files forever changed not just investigative journalism, but the public's understanding of institutional power. Those documents were practically identical to the ones I found in that red folder years later, hidden in the false bottom of a drawer in the episcopal residence where I was temporarily assigned. I immediately recognized the same format, the same carefully neutral language used to describe unthinkable atrocities. Letters from desperate parents, writing in shaky handwriting, begging the church hierarchy to do something about the priest who had destroyed their children's innocence. Detailed accounts from children, some in childish handwriting, others transcribed by social workers or therapists, describing horrors that no child should ever know, much less experience. The files also contained clinical psychological evaluations that explicitly identified certain priests as high risk for reoffending or not recommended for ministry involving minors. Yet subsequent memos revealed these same men being transferred to new parishes, often with direct responsibilities for youth groups, altar boys, or Catholic schools. There were memos between bishops and other ecclesiastical administrators openly discussing the problem of certain priests and debating strategies on how to manage it discreetly without ever mentioning notifying authorities or protecting vulnerable children. The sun is setting now, painting the sky blood red through the window of this rural retreat. This intense, almost supernatural red seems to symbolize the sacrifice of so many innocent victims on the altar of institutional preservation. The view is impressive, but my heart is heavy with the knowledge I carry. Sometimes I wonder, as I watch these glorious twilights, if I will ever be able to stop running, if I will ever be able to walk in daylight without fear of retribution. The birds are returning to their nests now, calling to each other with complex melodies as they prepare for their night's rest. They have a place to call home, a community that welcomes them, a sense of belonging that is so fundamentally human. I don't have that anymore. My decision to speak the truth cost me everything I knew as home. Among the documents the Boston Globe was able to access, one of the most devastating and morally repugnant revealed that Cardinal Bernard Law, the man I had seen revered at countless masses, the leader who kissed children on the forehead during confirmations, had personally transferred Father John Geoghegan to a new parish, even after receiving a detailed and distressing letter from a mother detailing how Geoghegan had abused 7 boys in the same family. 7 children, a family. Imagine the collective trauma, the family dynamics destroyed, the brothers united not just by blood, but now by a shared pain that many would take to the grave. And what was the Cardinal's response to this indescribable horror? A silent transfer to another unsuspecting parish and a cordial letter thanking Geoghegan for his dedicated pastoral services. No mention of the crimes, no alert to the new community, no restrictions on access to children, just a new beginning for the predator as his victims were left behind, struggling with wounds that would never fully heal. The documents revealed not just isolated cases, but a systematic protocol for dealing with abusive priests. A series of memos detailed how the Archdiocese ran a treatment program at a discreet institution called St. Luke's Institute in Maryland. Priests with problems were sent there for short periods, received cursory evaluations, and often against the recommendations of their own therapists, were returned to active ministry with only a change of scenery and a new group of unsuspecting children. The Boston investigation not only revealed the abuse scandal itself, but also exposed in meticulous detail the calculated and systematic methods used to silence victims and their families. The same methods I described in my last video for those who have been following this series of revelations. The Archdiocese had developed over decades a sophisticated system of confidential agreements that worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine. It was an almost industrial operation to suppress the truth. Families already devastated by the trauma of abuse against their children were approached by church lawyers, not pastors offering spiritual comfort, not bishops asking for forgiveness, but corporate lawyers from prestigious firms with leather briefcases and technical language. They came with financial offers, often shamefully modest sums considering the severity of the harm done, conditional on the signing of confidentiality agreements so strict that victims could not even mention the abuse to therapists or future spouses. To protect your child's privacy, the lawyers told the shocked parents. To avoid the trauma of a public process, they argued with false compassion. To allow everyone to move on with their lives, they promised with practiced smiles. In reality, these agreements existed for one reason only: to protect the institution's reputation and coffers. Silence was bought at a bargain price, and the cycle of abuse could continue unabated. Documents obtained by Spotlight revealed that the Archdiocese of Boston had quietly settled cases against at least 70 priests in the decades before the public exposure. 70. And none of these cases ever came to the attention of the parishes where these men served, or to authorities who could have protected other children. I hear soft footsteps in the hallway outside my room. My hosts have left a hot meal at the door. I can smell the comforting smell of homemade soup. We haven't seen each other directly since I got here. It's safer for them that way. They leave food, medicine, and the occasional book or newspaper, and I leave thank you notes. This arrangement is not just for my safety, but for theirs as well. There is a dark logic to this that I learned in my life as a fugitive. Not knowing who is helping you also means not being able to reveal their identities under torture or coercion. This is the reality I live in now, so far from the comfortable life I led as a respected parish priest. This simple room, with its rustic wooden bed and small table where I record these videos, is safer for me now than any ornate cathedral. One of the most inspiring stories to emerge from the Boston case was that of a man named Phil Saviano. In 1992, when the pattern of cover-up was operating in full force, Saviano received an offer from the church to remain silent about the abuse he suffered as a child. It was an offer of just $1,500, an almost insulting amount for the suffering of a lifetime marked by trauma, broken trust, destroyed faith. Phil did something extraordinary. He refused to sign the confidentiality agreement. They wanted me to promise never to talk about it, he later told reporters. As if this were any business transaction, as if child rape was just a corporate nuisance to be managed. Saviano's courageous refusal to be silenced was a crucial turning point. He founded the New England chapter of the Survivors Network of Priest Abuse, SNAP, and became a tireless voice for victims. Her courage in remaining visible and vocal was instrumental in other victims finding their own courage to speak out. It's frightening to think how many similar stories remain buried beneath layers of legal documents, how many voices have been silenced with modestly compensatory checks and veiled threats of ostracism and discredit. A voice like Phil Saviano's can break decades of oppressive silence. A single brave voice can inspire a real choir. If this video is impacting you, if you believe that the truth should prevail over institutional silence, leave a like now. Even better, in the comments. Every outpouring of support gives me strength to continue this perilous journey. The most devastating aspect of the Boston case, something that resonated deeply with me as a former priest who knew a system from the inside, was the monumental betrayal of entire Catholic communities. We are not just talking about abstract institutions or distant hierarchies. We are talking about organic communities where faith was the gravitational center of everyday life. Vibrant parishes where families completely trusted their priests, not just as spiritual leaders, but as extensions of their own families. Catholic schools where parents dropped off their children every morning, kissing their foreheads and making the sign of the cross, sincerely believing they would be in the loving pastoral care of men who represented Christ on earth. Entire communities built stone by stone, sacrifice by sacrifice, over generations, all united around a faith that was being manipulated behind the scenes to protect predators rather than the innocent. Night has completely fallen now. The darkness here in the mountains is almost total, with no city lights to pollute the natural sky. From the window of my refuge room, I can see more stars than I ever saw in my years in cities, serving in urban parishes where artificial glow obscured the cosmos above. It's deeply ironic, isn't it? How I needed to hide, to become a fugitive pursued by the system I once faithfully served, to finally see the entire vastness of the universe in its unfiltered glory. Sometimes we need to lose everything to truly see what has always been there. I vividly remember reading about one particular parish in Dorchester, St. Peter's. The case was etched in my memory because it perfectly exemplified the community devastation that these scandals caused. The priest of that parish, I will call him Father Robert, although his real name is in the public records, was universally loved by all parishioners. During his 15 years in that community, he had become the beating heart of parish life. He ran summer camps for underprivileged children, organized lively youth groups that attracted teenagers from all over the region, was invited to family dinners regularly, blessed new homes, comforted the dying, baptized generations of children. Every Sunday, entire families lined up orderly to receive Holy Communion from his hands, never imagining that those same hands, consecrated to bless and heal, had violated the innocence of dozens of children over the years. Hands that distributed the consecrated host had also touched children in unthinkable ways. The same voice that pronounced the words of consecration at Mass whispered threats of silence into the ears of its victims. When the truth finally came to light, through Spotlight's courageous revelations, the reaction in the St. Peter's community was a microcosm of how clerical abuse not only traumatizes individuals, but tears entire communities apart. The parish was literally torn between factions, those who simply could not accept the truth about a man who had baptized his children and buried his parents, and those who could no longer deny the mounting evidence and the voices of victims who were finally finding the courage to speak out. The battle lines within that once close-knit community have become brutally clear. Families that had celebrated holidays together for decades stopped talking to each other. Neighbors who had shared church pews for generations now avoided each other at the supermarket. Most disturbing of all, some of the most devout parishioners began openly blaming the victims for slandering a holy man, for destroying the parish with lies, for serving an anti-Catholic agenda. Victims who had suffered years of abuse now faced a second trauma: ostracism within their own faith communities. This is the true depth of the spiritual manipulation that the ecclesiastical abuse system creates. When faith is used as a tool of control, when spiritual authority is exploited to create impunity, when sacred language is diverted to silence, the harm goes far beyond individual trauma. Entire communities are poisoned, divided, and in some cases, completely destroyed. In St. Peter's, the church building is still there, imposing with its colorful stained glass windows and steeple that dominates the Dorchester skyline. But the community that once filled those pews never fully recovered. After the exodus of many families, especially those with children, the parish was eventually merged with two others due to low attendance and financial problems. Another pattern I have seen repeated in communities impacted by abuse scandals. Perhaps the most morally repugnant and spiritually revolting aspect of the Boston case was the systematic way in which the powerful were protected, even after the devastating public exposure that was supposed to change everything. This pattern of protection from hierarchs, while victims continued to struggle alone with their trauma, demonstrates the depth of institutional corruption that made me abandon my Roman collar and become this fugitive who now speaks to you from the shadows. The most flagrant and indisputable example of this system of protection was the case of Cardinal Bernard Law. This man, remember, was no minor figure in the ecclesiastical hierarchy. He was one of the most powerful and politically connected prelates in the United States, visited the White House, he had dinner with senators, he was consulted by the popes, and internal documents revealed by the Boston Globe proved beyond any reasonable doubt that he had knowingly and repeatedly protected predatory priests. For decades, moving them like chess pieces to unsuspecting new parishes where they continued to abuse innocent children. Any ordinary person facing such overwhelming evidence of complicity in crimes against children would have been indicted, at the very least. Seems logical, doesn't it? In any other context, an administrator who knowingly allowed predators to continue to have access to victims would face serious legal consequences. But Cardinal Law never faced a single day in a criminal court. Not a single day. Instead, after a few weeks of public pressure and escalating protests in front of the cathedral, he was quietly removed from Boston and transferred to Rome. And what happened there? Were you confined to a monastery to contemplate your sins in penance? Was he stripped of his titles and privileges? Absolutely not. He was appointed to a prestigious position as Archpriest of the Basilica of St. Mary Major, one of the four most important papal basilicas in Rome. He was given a luxurious apartment in the Vatican. He continued to participate in papal conclaves with voting rights. He retained his title of eminence. It was, by any objective definition, a promotion, not a punishment. My leg is throbbing again as I move to get a glass of water. Pain is a constant companion now. The doctors who examined the watchdog's bite wound days ago were frank in their diagnosis. The muscle was seriously damaged, the nerves compromised. "You may never walk without a limp again," one of them said with genuine compassion in his eyes. Strangely, this news didn't shake me like it might have before. I may never walk normally again, but I will bear this scar with silent pride, a permanent physical mark that I chose truth over comfort, justice over personal safety, the protection of children over the protection of my own privileged position. The hypocrisy of official statements following the Boston revelations was almost as painful as the original betrayal. When it all came to light, I vividly remember watching from my room in the rectory as an auxiliary bishop from Boston appeared on a televised press conference. With a solemn expression and voice controlled to convey gravity, he said these exact words: "No one could have predicted the damage that these few troublesome priests would do to the church and the faithful." Sitting alone in that room, I screamed at the television, "Lie!" It was a lie so blatant, so calculatedly false, that it still makes me seethe with indignation. The very documents released by the court proved in black and white that they not only predicted the potential damage, but coldly calculated it, like accountants working on risk spreadsheets. Internal memos explicitly discussed the risks to the reputation of the Archdiocese if certain cases were made public. Others weighed the potential costs of lawsuits versus the costs of preventative treatment. Nowhere in these cold calculations did the overriding concern for the well-being of children or the prevention of future abuse appear. The priority, clearly stated in those internal documents, was always and unequivocally to protect the institution, its leaders, and its material assets. What happened after the initial reports was equally revealing. The Church quickly hired public relations firms and crisis management consultants, not to help victims, but to manage the narrative and minimize damage to the brand. Empty words of regret and responsibility were carefully crafted by communications experts, while behind the scenes, lawyers worked tirelessly to limit legal liability and block attempts to extend statutes of limitations so that more victims could seek justice. A perfect example of this contradictory behavior occurred when, shortly after the initial revelations, the Archdiocese announced with great fanfare the creation of a victim compensation fund. That same week, his lawyers filed procedural motions arguing that the First Amendment protected the Church from having to reveal more documents or face certain legal liabilities. With one hand, they offered limited compassion. With the other, they fought fiercely in the courts against the same victims for whom they publicly expressed solidarity. The stories of the Boston victims were, without a doubt, the element that truly broke the heart of the American nation and eventually the Catholic world. When the initial spotlight reports began circulating, something extraordinary happened. Victims who had remained silent for years, decades in some cases, finally found the courage to speak out. It was as if an invisible dam had broken, releasing a tsunami of testimony that could no longer be contained or ignored by any institutional force, no matter how powerful. The images of these testimonies remain engraved in my memory with a clarity that time cannot erase. Grown men, lawyers, business people, construction workers, teachers sat in front of television cameras, their voices breaking, tears running freely down faces hardened by time and suffering, describing how they had carried a crushing burden of shame and guilt for entire decades. The most devastating thing was hearing, over and over, how each of them believed they were the only one, that they were alone in their suffering, that somehow, in some perverse, irrational way, they themselves were responsible for the abuse they suffered at the hands of those who were supposed to represent God on earth. The true extent of the psychological and spiritual damage inflicted on these victims became painfully clear as more testimonies emerged. Many revealed that they had attempted suicide multiple times over the years. Some even showed scars on their wrists, silent testaments to indescribable despair. Others struggled with severe drug, alcohol, or drug addiction, any substance that could temporarily dull the pain of memories that refused to fade. I saw reports of destroyed relationships, marriages broken, because intimacy had become a trigger for trauma. Parents who couldn't hug their own children without being haunted by flashbacks. Men unable to hold steady jobs due to episodes of crippling anxiety and deep depression. Entire lives, not just moments or phases, but entire lives, defined and shaped by a trauma that the institution not only allowed to happen, but actively covered up, protecting the perpetrators and abandoning the victims to navigate their suffering alone. This is perhaps the greatest betrayal. The church, which was supposed to be a refuge for the wounded, a hospital for broken souls, became the agent of destruction itself, and then denied care to the victims it itself created. I pause in my narrative. I can hear the distant howling of wolves in the mountains surrounding this refuge. There is something strangely comforting, something primal and honest about this ancient sound. So different from the carefully calibrated words, false promises and half-truths I have heard uttered for years in the halls of ecclesiastical power. Wolves don't pretend to be what they're not. They do not hide their nature behind elaborate clothing or complex theological language. Sometimes on nights like this, I wonder if I will ever find true peace, even after this perilous journey of revelation is over. Some wounds, as so many victims have taught me, never fully heal. One victim in particular, Patrick McSorley, gave a public statement that will forever be etched in my consciousness. During a press conference in January 2002, in a shaky but determined voice, Patrick described how Father John Geoghegan strategically approached him after his father's funeral when he was just 12 years old. The boy was devastated by the loss, emotionally vulnerable, seeking comfort wherever he could find it. Geoghegan, wearing the clerical collar that symbolized confidence and spiritual authority, offered the boy a simple ice cream and a car ride to talk about his father. It was during this outing that Geoghegan, deliberately using the vulnerability of a boy in deep mourning, sexually abused him. I knew something was very wrong, Patrick said on camera, but he was a priest. Who would believe me? My mother trusted him. Everyone trusted him. That traumatic experience sent Patrick into a self-destructive downward spiral. He fiercely battled drug and alcohol addiction for years, desperately trying to erase those toxic memories the only way he knew how. After more than a decade of silent suffering, Patrick finally found the courage to speak out, to report his abuser, only to discover the bitterest truth of all. The church had known about Geoghegan's predatory tendencies for decades. He knew and kept moving him from parish to parish, from one unsuspecting community to another, from one group of vulnerable children to another. Documents revealed by Spotlight proved that Geoghegan had been reported to the hierarchy at least 30 times before abusing Patrick. 30 opportunities to disrupt a predator's career, 30 missed chances to protect innocent children. The end of Patrick's story is a devastating illustration of the real human cost of this system of institutional cover-up. In January 2004, just 2 years after his courageous public testimony, and at just 29 years old, Patrick McSorley was found dead in a river near Boston. Another victim of the trauma he was never able to fully overcome. His untimely death stands as a grim reminder of the lasting damage caused not only by the initial abuse, but by the institutional betrayal that followed. Another young life lost to this merciless system of protecting the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The Boston victims' accounts revealed another disturbing pattern: the use of religious language and symbolism as a tool of manipulation and control. Many victims described how their abusers used theological concepts such as sin, hell, obedience, and the secret of confession to ensure their Silence. One victim reported that her abuser told her that what was happening between them was a special form of blessing, and that to question a priest was to question God himself. The Boston case was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that no one, not even me, with my insider knowledge of the system, could have completely predicted. Like a first stone breaking loose from a mountaintop and causing a devastating avalanche, the Boston Globe's meticulous and relentless revelations triggered similar investigations that spread like wildfire across dry fields throughout the Catholic world. What began as a local investigation of a persistent newspaper in a single American city quickly became a global phenomenon that shook the very foundations of one of the world's oldest and most powerful institutions. After Boston, Ireland was next. The Ryan Report and later the Murphy Report exposed decades of systematic abuse in schools, orphanages, and Catholic institutions across the island. The Irish revelations were particularly devastating for me personally, as my own ancestors came from that country, and the depth of the documented suffering. Children in religious institutions suffering not just sexual abuse, but systematic physical torture, deliberate starvation, calculated humiliation, was almost unbearable to read. Then came Australia with its royal commission that found identical patterns of abuse and cover-up. Then Chile, where entire bishops were forced to collectively resign. Germany, where reports revealed that thousands of children had been abused over decades. Poland, homeland of Pope John Paul II, where the documentary Tell No One exposed how abusers were protected in the pontiff's own backyard. France, Belgium, Canada, Mexico, Argentina. The list continues to expand to this day, years after Boston. The most disturbing thing, what really made me realize that we were dealing with something systemic and not isolated bad apples, was that in each country the same pattern emerged with a consistency that could not be coincidental. The same institutional system of cover-up operating in an almost identical way on different continents. The same calculated tactics of silencing the victims. The same relentless protection of the powerful at the expense of the most vulnerable. The same distorted theological justifications. The same predator transfers. The same attacks against whistleblowers. As if there was an unwritten operations manual that transcended borders, languages, and cultures. The fireplace in this mountain retreat is almost out now. Low flames crackle occasionally, casting dancing shadows on the rustic wooden walls. I watch these dying flames and realize how they resemble how I feel sometimes, almost consumed by the years of persecution, the constant threats, the physical and emotional scars, but still determined to keep burning as long as there is a single real stick to fuel the fire. This life, on the run, constantly moving, sleeping in different places, never knowing who I can trust, is certainly not what I imagined when I began this journey as an idealistic young man entering seminary. But the truth demands sacrifices, and some of us are called to pay a higher price than others. When the initial revelations from Boston began to appear in international newspapers, I was still trying to work within the system, believing that I could help heal from within. I remember attending crisis response meetings with other clergy, where public relations consultants instructed us on how to manage the narrative. I believed naively, perhaps stupidly, that this unprecedented public exposure would finally force a deep, structural reform of the Church, that the institution, faced with undeniable evidence of its failure to protect the most vulnerable, would turn inward in genuine and transformative soul-searching. Instead, with increasing desperation and eventual disillusionment, I saw the institution adopt a sophisticated corporate public relations strategy, creating impressive policies on paper, establishing child protection committees, publishing zero-tolerance guidelines that rarely translated into real changes in daily practices or deeply ingrained institutional culture. I saw bishops make eloquent public statements of repentance and contrition, their voices cracking with seemingly genuine emotion, while simultaneously instructing their lawyers to continue obstructing behind-the-scenes investigations and challenging statutes of limitations that would allow more victims to seek justice. It was this stark contrast between compassionate public words and calculated private actions that finally shattered any naive hope I still harbored for true reform within the existing system. That's when I realized I needed to make a choice: remain part of a system that had repeatedly proven its willingness to sacrifice children to protect its reputation and power, or break with everything I knew to expose the truth, no matter the personal cost. If you believe that stories like this cannot remain in the shadows, share this video now. Each share is a light that helps illuminate dark corners that powerful people would prefer to keep in the shadows. Your courage in sharing could be what inspires another victim to finally speak out. The impact was felt far beyond the boundaries of religion. Boston has become a journalism school case study in the power of persistent investigation. It inspired reforms in laws governing sexual crimes against minors in several states. It has changed the way other institutions that deal with children, schools, sports clubs, youth organizations, approach background checks and safeguarding protocols. It created a model for similar investigations into other religious denominations that would soon face scandals of their own. But on the other hand, and this is the bitter truth I must share, nearly 2 decades after the initial headlines, many of the fundamental and cultural structures that enabled these widespread abuses remain stubbornly intact within the Church. Secrecy continues to be valued above transparency. Institutional obedience is still often placed above individual conscience. Protecting ecclesiastical reputation remains an operational priority. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the extreme concentration of power in a few unaccountable hands persists as the central pillar of the ecclesiastical structure. Morning is coming now. Through the small window of this mountain retreat, I can see the first golden rays of the sun gently touching the tops of the coniferous trees, illuminating the dew that turns the forest into a sea of temporary diamonds. There is an indescribable beauty in this transitional moment between darkness and full light. Despite everything I've seen, everything I've sacrificed, each new dawn still gives me an almost irrational sense of hope, as if the universe is reminding us that darkness, no matter how deep, is never permanent. I notice that my leg hurts less today. The venom from the bite finally seems to be giving in to the antibiotics. A small victory. Sometimes it's the small victories we need to hold on to when the bigger battles seem so daunting and the path forward so uncertain. Like that boy, Patrick McSorley, who found the courage to testify, even though he knew his voice alone wouldn't change the entire system. Like that mother in Boston, who was the 10th, the 20th, the 30th person to report Father Jagan, even when all previous reports had been ignored. Small actions of courage that collectively, eventually, move mountains. The most damning proof that Boston's legacy remains unfinished came in August 2018, when the Pennsylvania grand jury report was published after a 2-year investigation. The report showed in excruciating detail that despite Boston, despite the countless public statements, despite all the solemn promises of reform and zero tolerance, the system of abuse and cover-up continued to function in essentially the same way. More than 300 predator priests have been identified in just one American state. One state. They are estimated to have victimized more than 1,000 identifiable children, with the possibility of thousands more never coming to light, and most disturbing, the same meticulous pattern of institutional cover-up, the same predator transfers, the same secret files, the same attacks on victims who dared to speak out. The Pennsylvania report, with its more than 800 pages of documented horrors, demonstrated unequivocally that even after the Boston earthquake, even after the film Spotlight won the Oscar for Best Picture and raised awareness among global audiences, the institution continued to prioritize its reputation and financial assets above the safety of the children entrusted to its care. The most important lesson from Boston, and the one I want to impress upon your consciences today, is that real, substantive change will not come from within the institution. You can't come. The structures are very rooted, the habits of power very ingrained, the institutional reflexes of self-preservation very developed after 2 millennia of practice. True transformation will come only through continued and merciless exposure, legal and social accountability, and the collective refusal of Catholics and non-Catholics to accept half measures, token policies, and empty excuses that are not followed up by concrete actions. The Boston Globe's Spotlight case won the prestigious Pulitzer Prize for a profound reason. It wasn't just an example of exceptional investigative journalism. It was a genuine service to humanity. It showed unequivocally that even the most powerful, oldest, and most venerable institutions are not and should never be above the truth. And it demonstrated the transformative power of persistent methodological inquiry to tear down institutional walls of silence built and strengthened meticulously over decades or even centuries. Don't wait for this transformation to come from within. I come from inside the system, and I can tell you, with scars to prove it, that those who try to reform from within are silenced, marginalized, expelled, or worse. Boston's history teaches us that the only language calcified institutions truly understand is relentless exposure and sustained external pressure. Every investigative report, every court case, every legislative reform, every courageous conversation in families and communities is a small crack in the wall of silence. And it is only through thousands of these tiny cracks that eventually the entire wall collapses. I need to end this broadcast now. The internet signal is spotty here in the mountains, and my equipment is precarious. This old camera and this water-damaged laptop are all I managed to bring along on my hasty escape. I don't know when or if I'll be able to do another broadcast like this. The risks increase with each video I post. This generous family who took me in is risking everything to protect me, and I can't put them in danger by prolonging my stay. But there is more, much more that I need to reveal. Documents that I managed to scan before fleeing, names of figures even more powerful than those mentioned today. Connections between dioceses that form a global pattern that few have managed to see. I'm trying to find a safe way to transmit this information, but I need more modern equipment, secure connections, maybe even a new transmission location. What I'll reveal in the next video, if I can do it, if they don't find me first, goes beyond Boston. It goes beyond even the cases that have already come to light. It involves people who are still in positions of extreme power, making decisions about millions of lives. The question that haunts me each night is, should I reveal everything at once, knowing that it would likely be my last broadcast? Or do I continue sharing in parts, keeping some information as life insurance? The answer will partly depend on you. If this video impacted you, if you understood the magnitude of what happened in Boston and its global implications, leave Boston in the comments to show that the truth matters, that I'm being heard, that the risk is worth it. Share with someone who needs to understand how powerful institutions can systematically cover up abuses and sacrifice innocence on the altar of institutional reputation. I hear footsteps outside. I need to turn it off. Remember, what happened in Boston didn't stay in Boston. The system continues to operate, just more careful, more discreet. In the next video...